Hey y'all, I'm Darren Moore. Call me your flip-flop philosopher. 2 decades ago, I began a quest to read as many of the best books as I could that were the best thinking from across space and time. And it's now time, August 19th, 2026, for me to share the best of what I've learned with all of you. It would be a shame if all this knowledge died with me. And the library, however, will remain intact. I am bequeathing that in its entirety to one young scholar to be chosen after my death. However, I have titled my program another way because I'm not interested in telling you anything that you already know. There are plenty of other places on the internet where you can go where really great experts can explain to you not only individual timeless truths, but also some of the most amazing discoveries that are taking place, particularly in the last 20 years in the world of neuroscience and psychobiology. And so it's just really exciting time to be alive. And so, like I say though, I am not interested in telling you what you can find easily someplace else. What I really want to give you is an interdisciplinary, related view of each of the different subjects. I will attempt nothing less than to give you another way of thinking about virtually every major issue facing mankind today. And so, the great futurist, George Gilder, and George may be the wisest person still alive today, walking the planet. George, he kind of redefined the term information as requiring surprise. It has to have a quality that is new. Otherwise, it's just data. And I am not here to just transmit data, knowledge, or even wisdom, although I will certainly do plenty of that. I am here to surprise you, to inform you, and to show you another way to think, like I say, about virtually every major issue facing the human race today. Now, before I break into song, let me concede that undoubtedly you will not be totally unfamiliar with everything that I have to say because I am discussing the major issues today. But I suspect you're not going to hear what I have to say about it anywhere else in the media. And it's also important to point out that I am passing on the great ideas from the great books, from many books which were immensely successful, and some of them were even popular. If your favorite authors are among my favorite authors, you are going to love this program. So like, for example, I always talk about the Big Dipper constellation of greatest thinkers. Who are the 9 greatest thinkers in my constellation? Well, as I mentioned, George Gilder would be one, but certainly Russell Kirk, Sir Roger Scruton, Thomas Sowell, Dietrich von Hildebrand is extremely important to me, and then Chester Belloc, G.K. Chesterton, and Father Spitzer is incredibly important. I'm a huge fan of Max Scheler. As I will explain to you, I ended up I kind of fell backwards into mimetic theory, the school of thought that I think revolutionizes everything. If you're not familiar with it, stick along for this ride. For me, it was one of the most amazing, enlightening intellectual adventures I had ever taken, to take the ride in mimetic theory with René Girard. But I also, as I'll show you the other part of the library another time, I've done a lot of work on politics and history, and I'm also a student in the Austrian School of Economics, and I will pass all of that on to you in this show, this program, another way. But I was really attempting to do 2 100 episode series, one that had nothing to do with politics, or was at least had as much of the politics taken out of it as possible, and the other was to be, I actually was calling it the New Centurion 100, which was kind of a revitalization and a rethinking of the New Centurion leadership program that I helped lead when I was the president of the Conservative Institute. And so now you know where my politics is, and I really didn't want to have this video talk about politics at all, because this video is an introduction to the very first course that I will feature on Another Way, which I believe is foundational. And that is the Mooreling 25, the first 25 episodes that will be released together all at once, so that way you can see how it all fits in, and it isn't in order. let me introduce you now to the Mooreling 25, as I'm calling it. And I realize that I need to have it closer if you're going to see it. But I got to get over this rug. There we go. Okay, so so I'm going to introduce you to the Mooreling 25 in this episode. I'm going to give you a little 2-minute version. Now, some of these episodes are an hour long, some are the length of a TED Talk, some of them are pretty in-depth, some of them are kind of lighthearted. And but there is an order to this, and what I realized as I was putting this together and condensing it, distilling it down from 100 episodes to 25 episodes, I kind of realized that these are like the major themes of my life, and I've basically more or less written entire books on these that have pages from several hundred to several thousand pages. All these books unfinished. And that in many ways, that this entire program, this entire channel here on YouTube is nothing more than a coping mechanism of mine to deal with the fact that I have been unable to finish these damn books. And so I guess it's a kind of a negotiation with my inner self, in which I'm saying, well, if you can't finish the darn books, at least you can give everybody an hour's worth of information on each of these themes, put it together in a program that will change everybody. Because by the time you do these 25, and then you get over to the next 25, which are the political ones, then now you're really talking about, a massive, it's not only a massive project, but it is an extremely broad stroke and vision of the cosmos. And so, and I realize that what I'm attempting here is nothing less than an attempt at a completely new theory of man. And particularly in episodes 6 and 7, where this is where I've spent basically the last 15 years of my life, is studying consciousness. What does it mean? How does it rise? And reformulating, redesigning, creating a new structure for the modules of the mind. We need a new theory of man today because simply all of the current theories suck, and all of the old frameworks no longer work. They cannot contain all that we now know. Again, let me reemphasize that there has been an explosion of discoveries in psychology and philosophy in the last 100 years. And so since Jung and Freud drew out their frameworks, and Freud was terribly flawed from the get-go, and I actually begin with Freud and build on what he got right. But because he had so many errors of omission, there's so much that needs to go into it. Plus, as neuroscience and neurobiology and psychobiology are coming online, we are realizing that along with psychological development, that the rise of man, the creation and formation of personality, is not as simple as we thought. And that there are plenty of discoveries to be made about it. Now, I'm going to be sharing those with you throughout this series. So, if your favorite authors are my favorite authors, we're probably kindred spirits. And if you love hearing your favorite books discussed by other fans of them, this is a great place for you. So that's something I learned from doing a radio show long ago, about doing radio shows about the great books, that the fans of those books will find you. So I am going to try to condense an education of a lifetime into 50 one-hour episodes. All the stuff that you should have learned at school or from your parents but never did. But being an overcompensating autodidact crippled with self-doubt as I am, it's difficult to know when I've actually read enough. So how do I know that I've finally mastered my subjects, that when I've finally taken enough in, it's time to start pouring out? Well, like we say when we play hide and seek, ready or not, here I come. In this video, I'll introduce you to my program another way, and it made me realize that just putting up this video, putting out the first 50 videos, which are the major themes of my field of study, not only show you, what a real polymath looks like, but it'll also show you what happens when you find someone who wakes up every morning. Although he's probably the most sedentary person you'll ever meet in your life, I still wake up like a greyhound chasing down the truth as much as I can. So when you have that ravenous hunger for discovering the permanent things, the invisible things, the hidden things since the foundation of the world, for example, then it becomes it's been an exciting journey, and I'm really looking forward to sharing with you. It is interesting going through real life. I never really encounter anybody who has really encountered any of these ideas. You know, I'm always shocked when I can ask people, you know, do you ever heard anything like that before? And they're like, no, never heard anything like that. It's amazing. And so if I can do that for 50 hours here, I'll have a foundation. And as I continue to read and, you know, pursue these subjects, subsequent episodes will be about them. And sometimes they'll just be little quotes. The interesting thing, for example, about any of my books is that if you go, yeah, so here's a really good book that is one of the most recent books in my library. But anytime you go through any of my books, there's going to be highlights and annotations through it all. And so just to have, for example, I would love to have an intern that would just go through all my books and then get all of the excerpts that have been annotated with the marginalia. That's my little trauma, the recurring aspect of it. It's a cycle of trauma. And so to have someone go through all of my books and have them pull together all of the little parts that say that are symboled, that have the symbol. Let's see, yeah, here's the autism coming out. But every place in the marginalia where there is that little symbol for trauma, if you put all of those quotes together, then you really have something. And so, and that's of course why I love Goodreads. So, Goodreads quotes are a great gift to humanity. So, yeah, you don't have to watch the videos in order, and I suspect most people won't, but rather they'll dip in and out of videos whose stuff interests them the most. And so this is a really great video to start, because I'm just going to give you a little quick 2-minute version of each of these episodes, so that way you know whether or not this program is going to be for you. Believe me, I know I'm not going to appeal to the mass man. Most people want to avoid doing any heavy thinking, and they want leaders to tell them what to do. They like the directed life. Others, on the other hand, are constantly looking for answers to questions like this. So let us begin. What are the eternal questions? They are, well, what does it mean to be fully human? Does free will exist? What is consciousness? Can consciousness be increased? What drives human desire? Why do humans change their minds? What is the cause of human conflict? What causes human happiness? What causes virtue? Why is there evil? What is the nature of the good society? What is the meaning of life? How then shall we live? And of course, what is love? At some point in their lives, everybody probably has asked these questions. But others of us, poor bastards that we are obsessed with these questions all of our lives. And we soon discover why these questions are called eternal, because no one's fully really answered them, because they are nearly impossible to answer. We also learn that there are precious few shortcuts to wisdom. Well, I'm going to draw a map of all those shortcuts, and I have constructed a conceptual framework that makes sense of the various intellectual territories over the course of these 25-hour-long episodes. I am going to give you the answers to the eternal questions. So, let me introduce you to the Mooreling 25. My last name is Moore, and I'm combining it with Earthling to describe another way of being human and another way of looking at these issues. And so I thought maybe this would be kind of a shorthand, so that way people, yeah, I've read the Mooreling, or I've watched the Mooreling 500. I totally get it. I agree with him about all, blah, blah, blah. I know that in a few years, I'm not going to agree with everything I'm about to tell you. So in the first episode, Evolving Better Brains, I will focus on the crucial formative years of our lives. And I'll give you a crash course in natal neurology. Because it's very important as we grow along here that we understand the mind-brain issues very clearly. So I'm going to crack open brain science to explain to you that we all go through an evolutionary process in our mother's womb, where we go through 4 phases that make us human, and it's very important to understand how this takes place in order for us to reach our fullest potential. And that's really what we're all trying to do here. We're trying to reach the best version of ourselves possible. And so we start out with the 4 stages. We start out with the reptilian brain and the brainstem, which is very, very reflective. It's very, very touchy. And then we get the limbic system, which is the old mammalian brain, which the limbic system regulates and responds to and deals with emotions. Then there is the new mammalian brain, which is the cortex, which enables all of the capacities that animals up to the highest apes are capable of. Okay, in other words, everything, and then that's of course the last step is there's a 4,000-year leap which takes place. Excuse me, 4,000-year leap. No, that was America. There's a billion-year leap which takes place when the prefrontal the prefrontal middle cortex comes online, and that enables all of the capacities and rationalities of the human, which is so different than these capacities are so different than every other animal on the planet. The problem is that human beings are merely the raw material out of which an occasional person may be constructed. It is not guaranteed that someone will get to the point where they are effectively using their frontal pre-middle cortex. Prefrontal middle cortex. Okay. And when they don't have this capacity, it is really, really sad. These are the people you walk around and you see, they have reptilian eyes. They were not developed into pure humans, okay? And so they never had a chance at being fully human. And that's what I'm here to fix. One of the things that I'm trying to fix here. The other thing is that I'm trying to fit these all in here, because in the first episode, I'm going to try to break the brain into and show bicameral brain theory, which is this extremely great, even though we've been talking about the 2 hemispheres of the brain for a long, long time. In 2009, Ian McGilchrist wrote The Master and His Emissary, and which established himself as the all-time leader of bicameral brain theory, and explains the tremendous difference between the left and right brain. Very much a work of philosophy. He, of course, then spent the next 20 years furthering his research, and then published these 2 monstrous books back in 2021, The Matter with Things, which are just sensationally great books that, they do kind of just pick up from where he'd left off. So I thought I've read most of these. I don't know, maybe I got to the new stuff. Yeah. Anyways, there is a massive amount of information I need to pass on to you from Ian McGilchrist and his bicameral brain theory, which then I will also now jump back to 1978 when John Bowlby discovered or formulated attachment theory, which is the 3rd part of 1969, excuse me. John Bowlby in 1969 published the book on attachment theory, which has pretty much been embraced now, no longer as a theory, but as a law. And although it is perhaps the most prevalent and dominant theory of early childhood development, it is still in many ways resisted, declined, defied, and tried to got around. We're trying to get around attachment theory. And what is attachment theory? Attachment theory is the idea that during the first 2 years of a child's life, his connection to his mother changes forever. And what ends up being burnt onto his brain is his attachment style. 60% of us have secure attachment style. We had attuned mothers who comforted us when we were crying. They soothed our concerns. They taught us that the world wasn't completely this unsafe place where we were going to be abandoned. And they also helped, so that is kind of a psychobiological regulation of our limbic system, okay? We were interrelatedly being regulated by our mothers so that we were enabled to have secure attachment style. And this enables us to have friends and families and spouses with whom we love and get along later in our lives. Unfortunately, and this whole point was proven in this monumental study, the uncomfortable situation study, when the toddler was left alone, the mother left, and the toddler was left in a room with, a bunch of kids. We see this experiment played out every day in daycare. And people don't understand, oh, here's my baby girl when I come pick her up at daycare. This is what she looks like. And she's crying. She's going crazy. Oh, mommy, where have you been? Or you get the ambivalent relationship where she's like, okay, mom's here, whatever, no big deal. Or you get the one who's glad to see mom, so there's not this huge dysregulation of the child's emotion. Well, this is an insight to the different types of attachments that we can have. We can have avoidant, we can have ambivalent, we can have disordered attachment style. And when this happens, all the pathologies follow in its train. Another thing, for example, that's so important when we think about evolving better brains is the idea, just the amazing discoveries that have taken place. Every one of these books have got something great in it, but perhaps one of the most important discoveries is the idea of the hope circuit. Okay, why do some people have resiliency, and why do some people learn helplessness? And what's interesting about these guys is they formulated this study which said that human beings or animals learn how to be helpless. And then 50 years later, they came back on and said, you know what, we were wrong about that. It isn't helplessness that is learned. Helplessness is the default. What is learned is the capacity to improve one's situation and to adapt. So the capacity to control one's situation is the real trigger. And so this is what he calls the hope circuit. If you do not have a hope circuit built, if you do not have a secure attachment theory, if you do not have a whole myriad of other things, your prefrontal middle cortex is just another portion of gray matter. And perhaps it has been corrupted to feed your lower appetites, okay? Like C.S. Lewis said that greater intellect without moral instruction is more likely only going to create more clever devils. So this is what you've got running around in the hollers and hoods of the worst places of America are people who do not have, didn't have the proper development in evolving brains. Now, I realize that is more than a 2-minute introduction of the first video, but obviously I need, and the rest of this is not, there's a heavy neurology-based, biological basis to much of what I'm talking about. Believe me, I am more of a philosopher and psychologist than I am a neurobiologist. And so I will try to make some of this easy for you as we go along. Now, to put a final point on episode 1 is, I guess I never did explain bicameral brain theory, but I guess you're just going to have to go to episode 1 to check that out. In episode 2, I will show not only how the left and right brain function differently, but that similarly, men and women behave differently, inherently differently. In episode 2, I'll explain rather elaborately what most people understand instinctively, a massive structure of truth about sex, gender, and human sanity. But what this house of knowledge, this conventional thinking that's been passed on through the millennia is currently under assault by a formidable and hostile political movement. So in episode 2, Man or Woman, the Two Eternal Polarities, I will make my argument from a considered place of love and compassion. And I hope to inform, persuade, and harmonize all sides of the argument. But I'm sure that I'm just going to cause a scandal amongst the cry bullies. However, in episode 2, however, I will only offend all sides of the argument over the battle of the sexes. I will wait till episode 13 to inform, persuade, harmonize, and infuriate all sides of the homosexual debate. Nevertheless, in episode 2, I will describe man and woman, not only as the only two possible alternatives of what I'm calling the eternal polarities. And you might think of the polarities as the positive and negative charges of electricity, the north and south poles on a planet. But I shall demonstrate them also as overlapping bell curves, so that way we can get a sense of how most people are in the meaty part of the curve, but there are naturally people out on the ends of the curves. Men who are far more feminine on one hand or more masculine on the other. Same thing with women. So I will then flesh out the differences between the minds of men and women so that we can talk about some of the other God-given differences, qualities that we may or may not have, like the 4 different kinds of people that are based on their God-given temperaments. I found that most people have never been presented most of these ideas, but particularly the 4 temperaments is very interesting because everybody knows the Myers-Briggs format personality test and the 16 different personalities, and I'll show you why that's a complete farce. Not a complete farce. 2 of them are merely right and left brain thinking. Nevertheless, in the 4 temperaments episode, I'll chart out the four different types of human temperaments. But in episode 3, the 3 different kinds of human agency will be examined in a way rarely before attempted. I need to talk to you about the differences between free will, freedom, and liberty. Most people, if they think about freedom and liberty at all, usually think of freedom and liberty as the same thing. They're synonymous, interchangeable. And I'll show you, however, that the difference between them is so critical to our future. Interestingly, people are losing their faith in whether we have free will at all, whether it exists at all. The determinists have returned, particularly in the highly successful book, a tremendously silly book by Robert Sapolsky, and I will completely do a takedown on it, using, in fact, one of the books that he himself introduces us to, using Kevin Mitchell's Free Agents. But I have done a tremendous amount of study, 15 years trying to do a book on the levels of consciousness and psychology, and so I will show you why we do have free will and why it's also very important for us to understand the difference between freedom and liberty. Yeah, this is kind of a cool line that I missed, but Sapolsky basically says that we're fleshy computers working out a complex biological program written billions of years ago by some master programmer, and that free will is just an illusion, a pre-wired, completely biochemical reaction to stimulus projected onto some inner screen of our purely material brains, and that consciousness itself is just turtles all the way down. So in episode 3, I'll unravel all this madness. But regardless whether you care about the battle between the free will deniers and its defenders, you'll want to catch episode 3 if you care at all about liberty and freedom, as well as authority, power, and politics. I'll make all these distinctions. As I mentioned, episode 4 is about the 4 temperaments, which is the greatest, lightest, hearted way to see the delightful way that we are all very different at our core functioning. Okay, I'll draw out not only on the great book, The Temperament God Gave You, but also I shall, wait a minute, that's not the right book. This is the follow-up book to what was really a wonderful book titled Surrounded by Idiots, which a great book by Thomas Erickson and which talks about the 4 different temperaments, but this book talks about it in the workplace. Furthermore, he went on to write a sequel to it, which talks about how psychopaths take advantage of us based on our different temperaments. And so, very interesting work by Thomas Erickson. But the point is that these 4 temperaments, once you see them in people, it really does change how you view people and yourself. And I'll make the point, hey, do you have room in your life for all 4 types of these people? I think you will, and I think you'll understand why it's so important that you should. Anyhow, it is probably my most lighthearted episode, and it's a lot of fun. The one thing is that I keep meeting these mothers who are sanguines. They're naturally cheerful, entertainer types like me, okay? And they have children who are melancholics. They're the goth kids, and they're like, what did I do wrong? And I'm like, you didn't do anything wrong. She's just been given a different God-given temperament. She's a melancholic. You're a sanguine. Learn to love it. Okay, so stuff like that. This whole show is going to be full of great info like that. So now, I'll get into psychopathy and the dark triad in episode 23, but during the first dozen or so episodes, I'm really just trying to show how it goes when it goes well, okay? And if by episode 5, however, I have not blown your mind with the things you've never encountered before, I'm sure that you'll never see the world the same way after you've caught my episode on mimetic theory, titled Episode 5, Mimesis and Prestige. Human desire, it's the causes of human desire and conflict. And so, listen to me. I'm one of the most well-read men on the planet, and even I was blown away a few years ago when I discovered the school of thought known as mimetic theory. I had 2 of the most important books on my shelf for years. This book and Cynthia Haven's book, All Desire is a Desire for Being, and the book that actually founded mimetic theory, 1978's Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World by René Girard and Jean-Michel Guillerand. These 2 books finally jumped off the shelves and into my lap, and I read them, and they completely changed my life. They also made me embark on the most amazing intellectual odyssey I had ever taken. And I got all this autobiographical crap in here. I didn't actually read Girard until 2024, until after I had moved to Alabama from Nashville. Indeed, if I had never moved away from Nashville, you probably wouldn't have been able to get me out of the honky-tonks long enough to read the 54-book series on mimetic theory. That's what you're seeing here. This shelf is the 54-book series on mimetic theory titled Studies in Violence, Mimesis, and Culture series by Michigan State University Press. And the point about mimetic theory, let me get to it here quickly, is, hang on, like that this time, that it gives you, instead of having rose-colored glasses, a way of going through the world, seeing the world through rose-colored glasses, Q. Bing Crosby, you have what I call mimetic spectacles, or what was originally, I thought I'd come up with that idea on my own, and then I went back and I read Guillerand's book, The Mimetic Brain, and I realized he's the one that came up with it. So sorry, and that is a spectacular book that I will discuss in depth in episode 20, where once you get the mimetic spectacles, and once you understand how mimetic theory works, once you understand why it is explanatory of human desire and human conflict, and then you can develop that out. It's kind of like it hides behind every other field of study. And so once you get the mimetic spectacles and you get those on, you learn mimetic theory, you have the capacity to see almost every other field differently than you had seen before. It gives you another way of thinking about everything. That's why I call this show Another Way. So what I'm going to teach you is not only mimetic theory, but how to use the mimetic spectacles. It's a little bit long introduction. I think it's more than 2 minutes, Darren, on mimetic theory. But let me just say that mimetic